before we talk tax strategy, let's look at how a company from southern China ended up challenging the world's biggest tech giants. When you think of global telecom leaders, names like Ericsson, Nokia, or Cisco, their names might come to mind. But in just 3 decades, a company that started by reselling phones, switches in Shenzhen, has risen to dominate one of the most strategic industries on the planet. That company is Huawei. And while Huawei is now best known for its 5G infrastructure and smartphones, the real story behind its rise lies in something less flashy, but far more powerful: its approach to R&D structuring. So, from small supplier to global powerhouse. Huawei was founded in 1987 by Ren, sorry if I pronounced it wrong, Zhengfei, a former military engineer. At the time, the company's core business was reselling PBX switches imported from Hong Kong. But early on, Huawei made a decision that would define its future. Instead of continuing as a middleman, it would invest heavily in building its own technology. By the late 1990s, Huawei was pounding cash into internal research labs. It built out engineering teams, created in-house standards, and began filing its own patents. This wasn't just a technical move, it was a strategic leap. In a world where controlling technology means controlling value, Huawei wanted to build its own destiny. So fast forward to today, and the numbers speak for themselves actually. In 2023, Huawei reportedly invested over $21 billion into research and development, more than 25% of its total revenue. That's really a lot. It holds over 120,000 active patents, many of them, of course, critical to 5G, semiconductors, and artificial intelligence. It employs more than 114,000 R&D professionals, which is over half of its global workforce. To put that in perspective, Huawei invests a higher percentage of its revenue into R&D than Apple, Microsoft, or Amazon. For Huawei, R&D isn't a department, it's a growth engine. Here is where things get really interesting. Huawei doesn't just do R&D in China. It has created a global research network with more than 20 R&D centers around the world. These centers aren't just sales offices, they are deep, like research hubs, each with its own specialization. So let's look at a few examples. Okay, let's start with Germany. Focus on wireless infrastructure, chipset engineering, and compliance with EU telecom standards. Another one is Sweden, tapping into a rich talent pool from former Ericsson and Nokia engineers, especially in radio, access networks, and network optimization. In Canada, they focus on cutting-edge work in materials science, advanced optics, and 5G radio architecture. In India, they have software development, AI training models, and telecom-grade operating systems. In France and Italy, it's human-machine interface design, industrial design, and visual experience R&D. Each center is placed with, I would say, surgical precision, based on a combination of access to, of course, specialized talent, local R&D tax incentives, like proximity to key markets or the regulators, government willingness to collaborate with Huawei is also a critical point. It's also important to have IP enforcement and legal frameworks. So Huawei has essentially created a global matrix of innovation where each node contributes to a shared IP pipeline. R&D is for them as a strategic asset. Many multinationals treat R&D as a cost center, something you spend on to support the product pipeline. Huawei treats R&D as a core value creation function. But here is the critical question. If your engineers are in Germany, your patents are filed in China, and your AI models are trained in India, who actually owns the value? This is where things get complicated. Because coordinating global R&D means managing not just operations but intellectual property, legal ownership, and of course, intercompany pricing. If you get that wrong, you expose yourself to tax audits, disputes, and wars because it's value leakage. That's what we are going to explore next. But first, let's reflect. Huawei isn't just building base stations, right? It's building an innovation architecture that spans continents, each piece structured to optimize talent, incentives, and strategic outcomes. Having engineers in 10 countries is easy. Structuring that without triggering tax nightmares, that's where the real innovation begins. Welcome back to the channel, where we make international tax strategy make sense without the jargon. I'm Michael from PREZO, and if you are new here, this is where we break down the strategies multinationals use to grow, structure operations, and still stay compliant in a complex global tax environment. Today, we are diving into one of the most fascinating global players in telecom, Huawei. Whether you love them or not, or maybe you even fear them sometimes, there is no denying one simple thing. Huawei mastered how to scale innovation across borders. And that has everything to do with how they structure their R&D operations. In this episode, I will walk you through Huawei's R&D blueprint, also the transfer pricing challenges behind it, and most importantly, the lessons your business or your clients can take from it. You've got engineers in Stockholm, coders in Bangalore, and patents filed in Shenzhen. But here's the multi-billion-dollar question. Who owns the value, and what will the tax authorities say? Let's be honest. Few areas in transfer pricing are messier than R&D. It's high risk. It's very, very expensive. It's also, collaborative. It can be treated by so many that, a multinational setting that's often spread across a dozen of jurisdictions, each claiming a piece of the pie. Now, imagine you are Huawei. You are managing R&D centers in Canada, Sweden, Russia, India, and several more. The outputs of those centers, like those cost centers, fit into shared global IP portfolio. But when that IP starts generating profits through licensing, hardware sales, or telecom contracts, which country should get to, be taxed? Which country gets to tax it? Welcome to the world of transfer pricing, for intangibles especially in this case. Why R&D is so hard to price? Transfer pricing is the, I would say, art and science of pricing transactions between related parties. For things like finished goods and routine services, it's manageable. But R&D, that's really different beast. Because here's why. It's future-oriented value. You are pricing something today that may not pay off for 5 up to 10 years. You should focus on multiple contributors because R&D often involves teams from several countries collaborating in real time. And of course, uncertain outcomes because most R&D doesn't lead to patents or profits. There is also one point even noticed by OECD because it's hard to benchmark. There are no market comparables for a prototype of 5G chip architecture, obviously. All of this makes R&D the most controversial and complex function to price in the OECD framework. How Huawei likely structures its R&D? Huawei doesn't disclose its full internal tax model, obviously, but based on its global behavior, regulatory data, and industry benchmarks, it likely follows a centralized IP ownership model. Here's how that works in practice. Execution is decentralized. R&D centers in various countries perform specific functions under centralized direction. Control and risk are centralized. Key decisions, like budgeting, project selection, IP protection, are made in China, likely at the headquarters, or maybe some designated IP entity. IP ownership is also centralized. So the legal title to patents and software rests with a single Chinese or Hong Kong-based entity. Compensation for foreign R&D centers is done via cost-plus contracts. They recover their costs plus a small markup, but don't share it in the upside. This model is very efficient, but also highly sensitive to scrutiny. To bring consistency to global IP allocation, the OECD introduced the DEMPE concept, used to determine who really creates and controls IP value. DEMPE stands for, I already talked about it in my previous videos, so you can check it out, but DEMPE stands for development, enhancement, maintenance, protection, and, of course, at the end, exploitation. So please remember that, because it's really the crucial part of taking care of the IP. The idea is simple. The entity that performs, controls, and funds these functions should earn the return from the IP. So in Huawei's case, the key is to prove that its central entity is not just holding patents on paper, but it's actively managing the R&D process, assuming the risk and driving strategy. If that's true, then paying foreign R&D centers for a fixed cost plus return is justified. If not, tax authorities might challenge the model and, demand profit reallocation. Since we are here, so what happens if you get it wrong? Let's say Huawei's Swedish R&D center is deeply involved in a 5G innovation and contributes to core development, testing, and enhancement. But it's treated as a routine contract R&D provider getting just cost plus 8%. If the Swedish tax authority believes it contributed to DEMPE functions, it may argue that Sweden is entitled to a share of the IP income. That leads to transfer pricing adjustments, double taxation, also lengthy and not so nice audits, penalty exposure, and reputational risk. And that really, this isn't hypothetical, because major companies like Altera, GlaxoSmithKline, and Apple have faced high-profile transfer pricing disputes centered on how much value was created and where. So let's now focus on strategic lessons for MNEs. So what should tax leaders, CFOs, and advisors take away from this? So let's break it down. Centralized IP requires centralized control. If you want a single entity to own your global IP, it must be funding the R&D, driving the project decision, assuming risk and responsibility. That means real substance, not just holding company in a low tax jurisdiction. Another point is that the contract you have for R&D must match reality. If your overseas labs are doing more than routine development, don't treat them as routine. Because if they direct innovation strategy, interact with customers, own local IP filings, they might not qualify as mere contract developers. Misclassification is a solid red flag. Third point, because documentation is non-negotiable. Every year MNEs should map their DEMPE functions, review intercompany agreements, align financial returns with functional roles. Auditors don't just look at structure, they also look at behavior. Remember to use cost contribution arrangements, CCAs, cautiously. Some companies opt for CCS, where multiple entities co-fund R&D and share IP proportionally. This can be effective, but it requires precise cost allocation, robust valuation methodologies, annual updates and monitoring. For many, a centralized IP model with clean contract R&D is simply simpler and safer. But tax isn't the only reason Huawei spreads its labs across continents. You will see later how talent, incentives, and geopolitics shape the R&D game board. Everyone's chasing R&D tax credits, but Huawei plays a different game. They don't just follow the incentives, they follow entire strategy. When most people think about where to locate R&D functions, they start with one question. Where are the biggest tax breaks? But actually, that's not how Huawei thinks. Huawei global R&D structure is built around 5 strategic variables. First one, access the world-class talent. Second, proximity to key markets and regulators. Third, local political and legal alignment. Fourth, collaborative academic ecosystems. And 5, R&D incentives and cost advantages. So tax is in the mix, but it's definitely not the driver. So let's unpack how Huawei makes these decisions and what other multinationals can learn from their approach. Okay, so example 1, Germany. Engineering excellence meets market trust. Huawei has major R&D facilities in Munich and other German cities. Why? What do you think? Germany offers one of the strongest pools of telecom engineers in Europe, especially post Ericsson and Siemens spinouts. German regulators are deeply involved in EU telecom and cybersecurity policy, having a footprint there gives Huawei regulatory visibility. Germany introduced a new R&D incentive framework in 2020, making it even more attractive. But this isn't just about cost, it's about building credibility in a market where trust is everything actually. Example 2, India. Scale, software and speed. India is home to one of Huawei's largest overseas R&D operations. The Bangalore center alone employs thousands of engineers. So why India? What do you think? It's a massive English-speaking talent pool for software, AI and mobile systems. They have competitive labor costs still, established telecom ecosystem with global players like Infosys, Tech Mahindra and Tata Consultancy. Historical availability of Section 35 2AB super deductions for in-house R&D, it was until 2020. Huawei uses India not for hardware innovation but for coding heavy disciplines like network management, device firmware and big data analytics. Another example is Canada, advanced technology close to the US. Canada has become a critical R&D hub for Huawei's North American ambitions. Why? These are the key reasons. Deep expertise in optical communications, like photonics and advanced materials. Close collaboration with top-tier universities, including Waterloo and UBC. Access to ASR and ED, like scientific research and experimental development, tax credits, among the most really generous globally. So, regulatory proximity to the US is also a key factor, without being inside the US, of course. By investing in Canada, Huawei gains access to North American innovations without being fully exposed to the US. Another example, Sweden. It is a telecom legacy and design thinking. Sweden is more than just another R&D location. It's also sort of symbolic, because legacy talent from Ericsson and Nokia has made Sweden a telecom innovation powerhouse. Swedish engineers are known for their expertise in radio access networks, signal processing, and spectrum optimization. Strong IP enforcement and data privacy give Huawei secure base in the EU. Also, Sweden offers a distinct advantage in industrial design and UX UI development, important for Huawei smartphone and wearable divisions. One last example, Russia. Algorithms, math, and cyber expertise. Though politically very controversial, Huawei has invested in Russian R&D for years. Why? Russia produced some of the world's top mathematicians and computer scientists. Universities like MIPT and Moscow State specialize in encryption, signal algorithms, and network theory. Operating costs are low, and government support that has historically been pretty strong. However, geopolitical risk is high, especially post-sanctions and post-export restrictions. Huawei balances this by limiting the scope of sensitive projects in Russia and integrating outputs into larger pipelines managed elsewhere. Me personally, I feel that this Huawei R&D investment in Russia is a red flag for the whole company, especially after Russia invasion on Ukraine. But, let's leave politics behind. So what about R&D incentives? Huawei absolutely takes advantage of R&D incentives, but never in isolation. Let's look at some examples. France, 30% R&D tax credit on up to 100 million euro per year under the CIR, I guess it's the name of the act. Canada, up to 35% refundable tax credit on eligible labor under ASER and ED. India, while recent reforms scaled back those super deductions, state-level incentives and export benefits remain still valuable. In Germany, post-2020 programs allow a 25% deduction on qualifying R&D wages. So, Huawei uses a layered approach, selecting locations where talent incentives and alignments intersect. The ecosystem playbook. Here is what really sets Huawei apart. It doesn't just run labs, it builds ecosystems. In many jurisdictions, Huawei partners with local universities, funds scholarships and fellowships, co-develops technical standards, supports open innovation platforms. This creates a mutually beneficial dynamic. Government sees Huawei as a long-term partner. Universities feed talent into Huawei's R&D engine. Local regulators gain insight into Huawei's tech stack. And this gives Huawei a strategic edge over companies that treat foreign labs as outsourced cost centers. But these are risks. There are risks, and these are the risks. Geopolitical tension has forced Huawei to repatriate some R&D functions from high-risk countries, avoid placing sensitive IP in exposed jurisdictions, invest more heavily in internal IP protection and legal firewalls. Still, the global model remains intact because it's built on strategic resilience, not tax arbitrage. Now let's focus on key lessons for M&As. So lead with talent, not tax. Pick R&D sites for depth, not just deductions. Use incentives as validation, not justification. Tax perks should support a strong case, not create one. Invest in ecosystems, not just locations. Local partnerships pay strategic dividends. So balance the innovation and geopolitical risk. Don't concentrate R&D in politically exposed countries. So R&D structuring means value chain structuring, because R&D isn't just a cost function, it's a value driver, one that influences pricing power, brand strength, and customer loyalty. So when you structure R&D smartly, you're not just minimizing tax, you're protecting and amplifying enterprise value. And that's what Huawei is really doing. Their R&D model doesn't just support their business, it's actually part of their mode. What smart, medium, and small companies can do to follow this logic? Use R&D incentives to accelerate, not justify, your presence. Map, DEMPE, and align IP returns with control. Use contract R&D structures carefully and consistently. Review intercompany agreements and TP policy every year. Embed tax strategy into global growth decision. But early. Huawei's story is a masterclass in structuring innovation. So, next up is a quick recap and what you can do right now to future-proof your global tax model. So, what can your business learn from a company accused of espionage, banned in multiple countries, and still at the top of global telecom game? Let's zoom out for a second. Huawei didn't become a global telecom powerhouse by accident. Its secret isn't just technology, it's structure. It's how they deploy R&D across continents, align IP with control, and empty tax strategy into business expansion from day one. And here's the best part. You don't need to be Huawei to use their playbook. So let's hit the key takeaways for today. R&D is a growth lever, not just a cost. Whether you're building a software in Portugal or prototyping in Singapore, your R&D structure defines where value is created and where it gets taxed. So, smart IP structures require real control. If you want to centralize IP income, your central entity needs to actually control the risk, decision, and budget. And DEMPE isn't optional, it's the rulebook. Tax strategy should happen before the IP exists. So once the patent is filed or the code is live, it's too late. The value is already created and tax authorities will follow the substance. So get transfer pricing involved from day one, especially in those cases when you're launching new labs or tech hubs, when you are planning global product development, or maybe when you are expanding into new markets. So it's crucial to involve TP. Build R&D where it makes business sense. Huawei puts R&D where the talent is, deepest. Governments are cooperative, but, with some limits, of course. Ecosystems are rich, and you need to be careful with that. But remember that you can use a lot of it. And yes, where incentives are aligned, but it never chases tax breaks at the expense of strategic fit. Compliance is a floor. Strategic structuring is the ceiling. Yes, transfer pricing must pass audits, but the best R&D structures also lower effective tax rates sustainably, reduce risk of disputes and adjustments, improve governance and internal alignment, drive long-term enterprise value. And the final thought, innovation scales when structures scales with it. Huawei's structure isn't perfect, but it's disciplined, global, and designed for long-term value capture. And whether you're advising multinationals or leading one, that's your edge. If this episode helps clarify how R&D structuring really works in the global economy, please remember to subscribe to the channel for deep dives on transfer pricing, tax audits, and global business strategy. I'm Michael from PREZO. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.